The police officer sits across the table from the weeping woman, who's dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that does little to stem the flow of tears. Between sobs, she recounts her story to him. Several days ago, she gave her husband a kiss goodbye as he left home for a business meeting out of town. He'd traveled for business before and always came back promptly. If he was delayed for any reason, he would give her a call and let her know. But this time, there was no call, no message, and no him. Now, after 4 days without so much as a text, she's beginning to fear the absolute worst. The police officer follows the standard procedure, asking about any enemies her husband might have had, or perhaps a reason to run away without leaving a trace. Was he having an affair? Was he in trouble with money? The woman insists vehemently that no, her husband is a good man with no secrets. He pays his bills on time, treats everyone with kindness, and never steps a toe out of line in any aspect of his life. She can't fathom why someone would want to harm him, and he would never, ever abandon their life together without a good reason. So, with nothing concrete to go on except the desperate pleas of a terrified wife, the police begin their investigation. What happened to this seemingly ordinary businessman that could make him vanish into thin air? They speak to his business associates, and all of them corroborate the wife's story. He's a perfectly ordinary, nice man with no secrets as far as anyone can tell. For a brief moment, suspicion falls on the wife herself. Did she kill her husband and then put on an act to divert? But there are no signs of foul play at the house and no discernible motive. If someone did decide to hurt the man, it wasn't his wife or anyone at his office. With no immediate family to speak of, all local suspects are ruled out. If it was foul play, it was someone in the city where the man had gone on his business trip. So they move their investigation there in search of answers. What they will eventually find, they never could have predicted in 100 years. The police don't know it, but the man does have one secret, something even his wife doesn't know about. He is absolutely terrified of using public bathrooms. In spite of this secret fear, on the day of his disappearance, he had to get up close and personal with a public bathroom. The encounter would see his worst fears realized. There's always something especially vulnerable about using a public bathroom in an unfamiliar place. Sure, it's unlikely that something will actually go wrong. The world isn't filled with masked killers skulking in bathroom stalls and waiting for an unsuspecting victim to stab. And it's not as if the pipes are crawling with alligators or rats ready to climb up through the bowl, teeth bared and ready to bite. But even still, there is a touch of anxiety to the whole ordeal. In a new place, all alone with your pants around your ankles, anything could happen. These are exactly the thoughts racing through the middle-aged man's mind every time he finds himself in need of a bathroom while out and about. Normally, he plans for that eventuality, and he stays close to home or at least close to a familiar restroom, one where he knows the lay of the land and feels safe. But today, a business meeting took him into a new neighborhood, and he miscalculated how long the whole affair would take. Now it's beginning to look like a real emergency. It is 4 days before his wife will file a police report declaring him missing, and the man is pacing back and forth on the street, musing over his options. He can't soil himself in the street. That would be absurd, not to mention illegal. He can't go outside. That's even worse. And there's simply no time to make it back home, even if he drives as fast as he possibly can. No, there's only one thing to do. With no other available option in sight, the man is going to have to face his worst fear: a strange public bathroom. Up ahead, he spots a public latrine. In any other scenario, he would never take this risk, but the only other option is finding a bush to squat behind, and that is simply unacceptable. So he ducks into the latrine and shuts the door behind him. He moves so quickly, he doesn't even notice the graffiti scrawled on the side: "Beware, snake." Even if he had spotted it, he likely would have written it off. Snakes can be dangerous if provoked, but they don't tend to pose a danger in the bathroom. But before we get into the insane details of the man's emergency pit stop in the terrifying public restroom, I have a question for you. Does something feel wrong with you? Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who's going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/DrBob. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost, without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/DrBob. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to the terrifyingly dirty details behind our guy's adventures in the public restroom. He reaches for the lock, but before he can turn it, it clicks into place seemingly on its own. That's a bit unusual, but perhaps there's some sort of automatic mechanism on the lock. He doesn't have time to worry about that right now anyway. He walks toward the toilet, trying not to focus on the cleanliness of the bathroom, when all of a sudden, he loses his balance, stumbling into the wall. He struggles to right himself, but the ground beneath him continues to pitch and roil. What is this, an earthquake? He can't hear the telltale rumbling sound, or anyone outside of the latrine reacting. He doesn't have long to think about it, before the ground beneath him rolls again, knocking him to his hands and knees on the filthy bathroom floor. He scrambles back toward the wall, pressing his back flat against it, and using the strength of his legs to slowly push back up onto his feet. He feels his way along the wall until he reaches the door and grabs hold of the knob. He twists it, attempting to wrench it open, but the door simply won't budge. He kicks at the door, trying to break it down, but it won't give. The knob rattles as he twists and turns it, but every attempt is fruitless. No, he can't let himself lose hope. If he gives up now, he'll perish inside this bathroom during what seems to be a highly localized earthquake. So as the floor tips and rocks beneath him, he rears back and throws his shoulder against the door with every ounce of force in his body. Blinding pain rips through his shoulder, and still the door stands firm. He collapses to the ground, clutching at his throbbing shoulder. A quick inspection reveals that it is almost certainly dislocated. So here he is, lying on the floor of the bathroom, groaning in pain, praying the earthquake stops soon. For now, he'll just have to lay here and catch his breath. After a moment, the floor steadies. Good. It's over. Now to do what he came here for, and get the hell out of here. Still holding his dislocated shoulder, he sits up and begins to climb back to his feet. But wait, what's that sound? That creaking, crunching, twisting sound. Slowly, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, he looks up at the ceiling. Is it getting closer? At first, he thinks it must be lingering disorientation from the fall, but no, it definitely is. Slowly but surely, the ceiling is pressing down on him. He glances from side to side and sees that the walls are doing the same. All at once, the room is constricting around him. The walls ripple and pulse as they move, as if they were alive. Beneath him, the floor feels warm, soft, not in a comforting way, but in a manner reminiscent of living flesh. The door won't budge, there's no window in here, and there's nowhere to run or to hide. To make matters worse, the room itself begins to turn and twist, knocking him into the wall. He can't stay on his feet, can't right himself in a space that is constantly turning and tilting. It is like being trapped inside a carnival ride from hell with no way off in sight. But at least there's no way it can possibly get any worse. As if the bathroom heard his desperate, foolish, hopeful thought, the you-know-what suddenly hits the proverbial fan. The toilet begins to rumble and rattle, shaking as something builds up deep within. Something is coming. Much to the man's horror, a jet of thick brown sludge begins to rocket out of the toilet bowl. The fountain of disgust touches the ceiling, dripping down the walls, all while the man watches in despair. The walls and ceiling keep twisting, and the floor begins to rock again. He tries his best to stay on his feet. The man slips in the mystery slurry and lands on the floor with a painful thud. Then, while he's down, the floor tilts at a dramatic angle, rolling the man toward the toilet. The entire room is somehow working together to force him in its direction. He claws at the door, straining to hold himself in place. It's ironic. He came in here with nothing but the toilet in mind, but now he'll do anything he can to stay away from it. He isn't sure what awaits him if he reaches the toilet, but after all he's experienced today, he knows it can't be anything good. But the floor is too slick to get a grip on, and slowly but surely, he slides toward the gaping porcelain maw. He screams, calling out to someone, anyone, to save him, but there's no one to hear his cries. The ceiling presses down tighter and tighter, and the walls squeeze closer around him, writhing and jerking around him, and hastening his journey towards certain doom. His fingernails leave gouges in the floor as he slides and reaches the opening of the toilet. The walls and ceiling are right up against him now, physically pushing and cramming him into the hole. First his feet, dozens of tiny bones crunching as they're forcibly contorted to fit into the small opening. Then his ankles, his shins, his knees, each inch of movement more agonizing than the previous one. With the building closing around him like this, forcing him down into the toilet's opening, he can't help but feel like prey in the belly of some enormous beast. That's exactly what's happening, he realizes through the fog of terror and agony. It would almost be funny if it weren't a nightmare come to life. The toilet is eating him alive. When the man has been crushed up to the thighs, he loses consciousness from the pain. It's a small mercy, but it means he won't be awake for what comes next. Bit by bit, the toilet swallows the man, the interior of the bathroom crushing him to a pulp as it does. When the room returns to its original size and shape, there's almost no evidence that the man was even there. Only a small pile of skull fragments and a reddish-brown smear along the floor suggest anything was ever amiss. Several days later, the police come looking for a missing businessman. At first, the trail appears to have gone cold, but then a local man reports seeing a man in a suit enter the latrine. He also explains that, as far as he can tell, the man never came back out. When they enter the latrine, they spot the skull fragments and a smear of organic matter and take the samples in for testing. The sample is human and a match for the missing man. With more questions than answers, they turn to associates with more experience in such mysterious cases. All the while, the officers struggle with a dilemma. How do they tell a grieving widow that her husband may have been killed by a toilet? Certain occurrences defy words, and that was definitely the case for this first recorded activation of SCP-3414. SCP-3414 is a public bathroom located in the Kibera neighborhood of Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. It consists of a single pour-flush toilet, which opens into an underground pit shared with its neighboring toilets. The latrine is completely unremarkable to a passing observer, with the exception of the writing on its side, "Beware Snake." The origin of this writing is unknown, and in a surprising twist, is thought to predate the manifestation of the anomaly inside of SCP-3414. Whoever wrote it there must have either had the power of precognition, or been somehow responsible for the anomalous aspects of SCP-3414. As for these anomalous aspects, they activate whenever a live, warm-blooded organism with a weight of more than 20 kilograms enters the latrine. Once an acceptable target enters the confines of SCP-3414, the door will shut on its own and remain closed for the following 10 to 12 minutes. Reinforced observational devices have been placed inside SCP-3414 and captured the details of what befalls the unfortunate victim next. I don't have to tell you that none of what follows is pretty. It begins with the shifting of gravity in the latrine, creating a rolling and pitching motion that knocks over the being inside. Next, the ceiling and walls begin to twist and turn, constricting around whatever is inside and potentially crushing it to death. During inspection afterward, the walls appear structurally sound, but are warm and slightly pliable to the touch within the first 6 to 8 hours after a feeding. After the walls have begun to twist and crush the unfortunate would-be bathroom user, dark brown slurry begins to eject from the toilet at a rate of around 10 kilograms per second. The slurry has been found to be made up of the following components: leaves, 5%, partially digested biological tissue, 22%, and fresh water, 76%. An analysis of this biomatter revealed that it was primarily of piscine origin, or fish, for those unfamiliar with the terminology. Mammalian and avian skeletal remains have also been found in the organic matter. At the conclusion of a given activation period, the slurry, along with the crushed remains of the unfortunate victim, will be sucked down into the toilet. Oddly enough, SCP-3414 does not ingest all parts of the victim's body. For example, it will crush the skull, but not swallow it into the toilet. Foundation researchers attempted to trace the origin of the matter in the slurry and found that it matched samples collected in the Amazon basin, more specifically, along the lower course of the Rio Negro. Genetic profiling of leaves and tissue remains has narrowed the specific region of origin to the Anomalous National Park in Brazil. The waste pit itself, located below SCP-3414, was examined and found to be non-anomalous. None of the ingested material from SCP-3414 was found in the waste pit either, which raises the question, where did it all go? I'm not certain I'd want to find out. Following the initial containment of SCP-3414, an addendum was added to the official file. The heading, Ingestion Log, speaks for itself. I will elaborate, however, and include the grisly details. Misery loves company, after all. The first date in the log is May 9, 2017, and is the first activation of SCP-3414 on record. The subject, J. Mwangi, could not be recovered. However, his identity was confirmed via the DNA analysis of biological remnants and bone fragments found at the scene. His was not the only DNA present in the remains, however, and the unidentified non-human DNA, as well as the unusual circumstances of Mwangi's disappearance, were red flags to local authorities. SCP assets embedded there contacted their higher-ups, and the Foundation officially took over the case. The next ingestion on record occurred on June 10, 2017. Agent S. Kamau entered SCP-3414 during its initial containment and was quickly overpowered by the jets of slurry ejected from the toilet. The walls of the room closed in around him, knocking him down and preventing him from escaping. Then, while he was immobilized, SCP-3414 grabbed hold of Agent Kamau's feet and began to drag him into the toilet. As the human body is not made to fit into a toilet, the attempt to force his body through the toilet's opening began to crush his bones. First his feet, then his ankles, and up to his kneecaps. Foundation officers outside were able to force the door open, cutting the ingestion process short before any more of Agent Kamau's body could be crushed. They were able to remove Agent Kamau from SCP-3414 and stabilize his condition there. However, his health quickly deteriorated, and he died 3 days later due to complications from sepsis. The only other ingestion on record was a live sedated pig placed into SCP-3414 on October 10, 2017. It was placed inside in order to determine the activation threshold of the anomaly. The head and torso of the subject was crushed, but was not ingested. This suggested that SCP-3414 was either not hungry at the time, or was a bit picky about what it might want to eat. If it was the latter, the anomaly would not remain picky forever. After an incident occurring on April 5, 2018, the containment procedures were updated to include regular feedings, usually involving a sedated pig. On that fateful day, a large amount of brown slurry burst from the toilet of SCP-3414, in spite of the fact that it had not been activated beforehand. Unlike the usual secretions, this slurry was highly acidic, with a pH of 2 and a high concentration of hydrochloric acid. After the area was cleaned, SCP-3414's walls began to peel and to shed translucent mucus and diluted blood. These excretions continued every few hours for the next several days. This presented an obstacle to usual waste disposal measures during that time. A sample of the blood was taken for analysis and was found to belong to a single specimen of Eunectes marinus, or green anaconda. Additional testing of the blood showed abnormally low levels of prealbumin, which suggested that the snake was acutely malnourished. In light of this new development, resident herpetologist Dr. S. Nyong'o weighed in. He suggested that live organic material be provided to SCP-3414 in order to solve the problem. At his instruction, one live pig was delivered to SCP-3414, and the excretions immediately stopped. Additionally, attending researchers reported hearing a high-pitched hissing sound coming from the ground. The official containment procedures were updated in order to include regular feedings for the anomaly. SCP-3414 is currently under the jurisdiction of the Kenyan Slum Cleanliness Program, or KSCP, a slum upgrading initiative affiliated with the Foundation. In order to conceal the existence of SCP-3414, it has been incorporated into KSCP's administrative building in the Kibera district. The entrance to SCP-3414 is secured with a pair of steel braces in order to prevent any unintended activation of the anomaly. According to the initial containment procedures for the anomaly, the aforementioned braces may only be removed for the purposes of experimentation or feeding. Oh yes, there was a procedure for feeding the anomaly. Once a month, a live pig, treated with a sedative to minimize suffering and struggling, would be introduced into SCP-3414. Then, the area was rinsed with fresh water and disinfectant. If there's one place we can, or at least should, all expect to feel safe from anomalous threats, it's the bathroom. As far as I'm concerned, the bathroom is for taking care of business and nothing else. But I suppose in this world of unexplained horrors and deadly mysteries, nowhere is truly safe. There is no such thing as a sanctuary. I don't say this to frighten you, but to urge you toward caution. Keep your wits about you, no matter where you are or how innocuous it may seem. You never know what is lurking, waiting to constrict around you and drag you to a watery grave. Well, if you're lucky, it'll mostly be water. All I know is this. Next time I'm out in an unfamiliar place and I have to go to the restroom, I'll probably just hold it. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-4934, The House That Chuck Built, Looney Tunes.